Welcome to the ASAP 2 Board Leadership and Governance webinar. We're happy you're here and we will start shortly. We'll let a few more people come into the meeting rooms. Welcome everybody to the ASAP 2 webinar on Board Leadership and Governance Training Manual. We'll give it one more minute and then we'll get started. Okay, everybody, welcome to the ASAP 2 webinar on Board Leadership and Governance Training Manual. We're delighted you all are here. Next slide, please. Many of you know the features of our Zoom, but I'll just go over them quickly if you're new to this webinar. We have the chat function, which is open. And if you could let us know where you're from in the chat, it's always nice to know who we're sharing this time with. Please use the Q&A box to ask your questions for the presenter. We will have a co-presenter read out the questions at certain times during the presentation, and they need to be put into the Q&A. If you put them in the chat, it's difficult for us to find them. We will have a couple of polls today. Actually, I'm not sure we're going to have a couple of polls. Please disregard that. And then the presentation for today's webinar will be stored on the ASAP website, which is listed here. Next slide, please. So ASAP 1 and ASAP 2 stand for Accelerating Support to Advanced Local Partners, and we are ending in July 30th, 2024. Until then, we have a lot of work to get done and many, many more webinars, but our goal is to help USAID support local organizations so that they can receive USAID funding directly. And we help local organizations by helping them understand the U.S. government and USAID requirements for compliance to manage a program, as well as to understand the PEPFAR reporting, implementation, and management processes. Next slide, please. These are the countries where we are working and have worked, a total of 18 countries. Next slide, please. Overall, we've worked in 18 countries and with over 126 local organizations. That includes 113 NGOs and 13 government entities. Next slide, please. You can find all of our webinar information on our website. I mentioned the website before, but you'll find all of the recordings and the materials on our website, and they're available in 3 languages. Next slide, please. We have a lot of webinars coming up, and I do want to bring your attention that the next one is January 30th, and that is part 2 of this training manual. Then we have USG rules and regulations that will be done by Doug Frankie. Good human resource practice, understanding the required and applicable standard provisions, leadership and governance practice session 1, that'll be the French version. Organizational capacity and compliance using our NUPAS Plus 2.0 tool, how to write an abstract, sustainability, resource mobilization, and social marketing, so how to raise funds for your local organization, procurement, property management, compliance issues, and then financial policies, internal controls, compliance, and then March 7th, data for decision making. We have many more after these dates, but I wanted to share with you the upcoming ones, and we hope you register and join us then. Our presenter today is our dear Petronella Morsandube, and she is honored with the Queen's Honor of OBE and a former Executive Director of Health System Strengthening and Capacity Building for Deloitte & Touche. Petronella serves as a Governance and Executive Leadership Capacity Advisor for ASAP 2. She has helped support 30 local organization boards to grow in maturity and to reach the compliance standards, supported them in organizational development, behavior, strategic planning, risk, and performance management. She's customized these organizational programs in Africa to enhance the responsible leadership, align workforces with strategic goals, and implement sustainable practices. Petronella has an Executive Master of Business and Administration from Astridge and a Bachelor of Science in Health Sciences. She is joined by our equally competent and professional and wonderful Mesmi Bogo, who will be asking the questions. Mesmi will be leading the same session in French in March, I think it is, for that session. Next slide, please. So here's the agenda for today. We're going to do welcome and introductions, focus on the training manual, the leadership, governance, and training manuals, and then going through the modules. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Petronella to lead the training session. Petronella, could you turn on your camera? And Mesmi, could you also turn on your camera so people can see who the presenter is and who is the supporter for asking questions. There you go. Welcome. And welcome, everybody. I'm turning it over to Petronella. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine. Welcome, everybody. To see my slides. Welcome. It's really lovely joining you all, and I hope this session is going to be very interactive. Thank you so much for making time to come and be part of this presentation about board leadership and governance training manual. This is a manual. It's a tool developed by ASAP to improve the capacity of local partners and executive director, and of course supporting the and adopting good leadership and governance. It will also support capacity advisors, in their training, mentoring, and coaching, something that we are really, really keen on in ASAP. To support those board leaders to set the tone at the top of their organizations. It will also assist in preparing the local same organizations to really manage, partners, their sort of local partners with effective boards. The board training is an area that had previously given us some headaches. And this time, we took some time before the new board came into work. This was a comment from Dr. Ojilo, who is the chief executive from AFTA. He was very much saying, they took time before the new board came in to work with ASAP, which is our team, to train the new board and help them understand what was going on. And even after the board training was over, he claims ASAP to continue to follow up. And this is, I was with them following up also and reviewing policies. So that's what he was saying about me here. And these have been very helpful areas. This has been an invaluable support. This is one comment from after. And then another comment, the training provided to the board totally changed them. I have women and 6 men on the board, but of different personalities and different expertise. They're really working and supporting us these days. What we learned now is that the board has to be committed above all. They have to be responsible for the organization's needs. It is the board that decides the policies and the strategic plan, almost guiding the organization. So when we speak to other organizations about boards, some organizations are not confident about their advisory boards. Our board members are very good examples of the board we are supposed to have. And this was from Ato Klilunega, Executive Director of Integrated Service on Health and Development, ISHDU, in Ethiopia. Just sharing some of what was being said there. Sorry, apologies, Jeffrey. I note the section on the right on the pictures is actually impacting on my slides. Could we move that? Sorry. I need to minimize it. Not sure if that's the one. Probably have to do this. Sorry. My apologies for that. So I think we've been running a lot of, board effectiveness sessions. And this slide is talking to when we did our local partner meeting in Joburg in November 2022, where people were asked, what was your favorite session? And I think, Catherine has used this slide very much so. So it is in here. And everybody, it was overwhelming that people were saying, and I'm sure some colleagues are here today, building effective boards, leadership builds or destroys NGOs. So, learning about good governance versus bad governance was one thing that people totally appreciated. They also talked about the building of board capacity and highly effective boards. As you can see from the list there, key messaging was very much developing effective board, session on effective board. The session strengthened my capacity and very much strengthening the boards again. So that was some of the feedback that, we're so proud of. And also, one of the key things when we start looking at the boards, and you will see through the sections I'm going to be talking about, there are so many frameworks, tools to do with governance. And as you can see on this presentation, very much looking at some of the governance, frameworks that we can use, sustainability, maturity matrices that would assist each of the local partners from where they are and them getting a sort of a vision of where they could end up if they improve their safer strategy, board strategy, stakeholder relationships, something we talk about quite a lot because stakeholder management is key for each of our LIPs, in particular, the role that the board plays in stakeholder management, but also looking at the executive director and senior management. So all these tools very much contributed, and many more, which is be referenced in the training manual, very much about the dashboards, looking at the leadership models, and looking at some of those dysfunctions of teams so that really we get an overall of all the key issues. So that's some of those tools very much I covered in there. In terms of this leadership, obviously at ASAP, we looked at the capacity gaps identified in the New Plus assessments, and each organization that we work with very much have got a work plan that capacity development plan that comes out of that assessment. And a lot of the key issues that were coming in were very much about absence of a proper functioning board, and that talks to tokenism. So some, local partners perhaps still very much in their early stages of maturity, not quite having a board, but not an active board, if you like. And then some of the issues to do with founder syndrome, again, pretty much talks to some of this tokenism as well, whereby, someone started the organization, but then they try to maintain disproportionate power and influence in the organization. And then, of course, there are all important role that the senior management plays struggles to find the right balance, and this affects performance. And that's why I'm hoping as I go through these sections, you will start to pick up on some of the key areas why we decided to have this manual in all these other important areas. Then we talk about some LIPs who appoint their friends or allies, as I call them, who do not have the needed skills to be on the board. Very much talking about, yes, you've got a board, but is the board effective? Is the board composition right and diverse? And then, of course, some of, again, power is centralized with no delegation and management support. Pretty key area that, I'm sure later on we'll be discussing. I'm sure most of us will be putting up their hands and saying perhaps we've come across to some extent to some of these examples. Power is centralized with no delegation and management support. And then poor participation by important people. So the people who are important to the organization not being part of that participation. And then there's some LIPs, local partners, the organization runs in permanent crisis mode. So really they just, in crisis all the time. And that's part of why we've really looked to how can we strengthen some of these key areas. And then the local partners structure, which is not fit for purpose. So very much at ASAP, we looking at, people, when we say fit for purpose, looking at the systems, the structures, the skills, and all those elements that I will be talking to later on. But also asking themselves if money is being well spent by the organization. Pretty key areas for us. So our objectives really with this training manual is very much to enhance the capacity of the board and executive leadership. Certainly, I have always encouraged all our executive directors to ensure that, the board is represented, but very much executive leadership, but not just the one person, senior management, for instance, finance director, and indeed some of the key members, including chief of parties. And is to refresh the knowledge of key staff on board governance, highlighting the importance of a board mandate, a key area that we cover in this training manual, and the good governance systems. So what are the bad governance systems vis-a-vis the good ones? Sharing very much, and this is a key passionate area for me, sharing effective governance and leadership frameworks, principles and tools, like the example I gave them of maturity model, examples of good effective teams. For instance, those who, when we look at accountability, when we look at commitment, how do you work with, trust and ensuring accountability in the organization, but very much management of conflict within those organizations. And these tools are pretty key. And that contributes, of course, to the next bullet point, improving board capacity to manage performance of the executive director. And this is an area, having been working with ASAP for 4 years now, we find that sometimes you come across boards who are not so clear about their role with regards to the ED. Maintain effective oversight of board risk. One of the key areas we expect the board to satisfy themselves that they've got enough visibility in the organization. So oversight is enough visibility about the risks that are in the risk the organization is facing, and that they've got someone assigned to actually work on that. And if you note, I didn't say run the organization. So during the training, there will be some parts where we clarify very much about what the role of the board is versus that of the executive director. It's about governing and also looking at the executive running the organization. Looking at finances, that they perform well, advice management, and of course, the all-important development of that strategy, very much ensuring that if you've got a strategic plan, that the organization has got enough resources to implement that strategy. So as you can see, it's very much also talks to improving the executive director's role in strategic leadership. And when I talk about strategic leadership, I'm talking about not management, because sometimes with some of our executive directors, if they're still fairly new in their role and or depending on their previous experience, it's really trying to take them through to working at a strategic level, that big picture, understanding the board, understanding the stakeholders, and developing their skills such that they can influence and have that emotional intelligence to run the organization. So, board leadership. The manual addresses the governance concepts. It defines and clarifies the roles of the board, as I say, ED and senior management. It explores, but actually the favorite word I always like to use is refreshes, because most of the local partner teams that we work with have got that experience. So it's also refreshing, just reminding them and maybe adding some more other areas that they may not have thought about. The core skills and competencies required of boards, covers areas of how a board and leadership should set the tone at the top of their organization. If you recall, just a minute or so ago, I talked about the board governing and not running the organization. And those key areas are very much accountability, which is a formal, transparent system, is in place to hold people accountable. Delegation of authority and having enough internal control systems. Those key areas, we say the checks and balances, that ensure that the policies, tasks, processes, and behavior is such that, the board are appraised, are aware there's a risk in the organization. And then, of course, ensuring effective governance in board proceedings. One of the key areas we as advisors, governance and leadership advisors really focus on is ensuring that board reserved matter agenda. What are the standard things we expect each board every quarter to have on those? Risk is one of those. Finance, so where they're at with finances, and indeed any other key areas that the board feels very important. For instance, strategic plan. Are we on target on that? And also ensuring effective governance in those board proceedings. Declaration of conflict of interest, and just making sure that they're on top in terms of the governing board, that they're covering the key areas. And then, of course, the managing of the performance of the executive director is pretty key. something that we expect the chair to take on board, but also with feedback and support from the board members themselves. So the manual covers governance and leadership themes on factors that create and sustain high-performing board governance teams. Perhaps I'll just stop there to see if there are any questions on the chat, Mesme.
Yes,
Please.
Petronella. We are happy now to first say that we have above 148 attendees from 19 countries, which is very interesting. We're still hoping to have other people. And we have people, some question comes in how to get copy of this manual, how to get access to the presentation. And then somebody asked a question about whether ASAP is providing a certificate of participation for those who are attending the webinar. Those are the three questions we have now for the moment. Please, I encourage each and everyone to continue to ask questions as the presentation is going on so that we can group some time. Over to you, Petronella.
Thank you. I think, yes, we will be sharing this information with you, and I will certainly talk to Catherine and the teams about also the certification that has been mentioned, because the whole idea is to really share this good best practice so that, our colleagues, you guys out there, will start to have it's a train the trainer opportunity so that really we can continue to strengthen governance, which is a key stakeholder requirement. So yes, indeed, we will do that. So
Now, another question for you, Petronella,
sorry?
before we move ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Another question, participant was asking if you can comment more on the founder syndrome. What is it exactly?
Okay, so a founder syndrome is where one or two, three people, a group of people decide to start their own charity, the local, the local partner organization. And normally the person who's obviously started this organization becomes the executive director. And with the founder syndrome, what we tend to see, and I think some of it is through no fault of their own, because, when you've got this good idea, you want maybe to look after, the vulnerable children or HIV or palliative care, whatever you're looking to be addressing. They don't really then focus or understand. They may not understand what is expected of them with regards to being an executive director of that organization and now receiving resources, funding from, say, some of the donors. So, and of course, some of the requirements of that, like we are very much promoting having a good governance structure that is separated from the executive director running the organization. And you find with the founder syndrome, they struggle with coming to terms with the fact that now there's someone performance managing them. You often hear of some stories where they turn up at the board and it's almost like the executive director is wanting to run the board, but in actual fact, it should be the other way around now, where he or she has to report with the teams on those fundamental key areas I was mentioning: risk, strategic plan, progress with that, and ensuring that financial management and systems of checks and balances are in place and that the organization is running as it should. So I'll stop there for a moment, but that's the founder syndrome. And it's very much, and I think sometimes when I have come across some of, the colleagues like that, it's very much almost like a blind spot sometimes. They're not aware because, of course, then as Maya Angelou says, if once you know better, you do better. So it's where then we coach, mentor, and support them. That we're not going to take your role away, but we want to strengthen you and them understanding and starting to function at a strategic level. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think as we move to the presentation, there are two questions that you just need to keep in mind, and I know that you are going to answer those questions. One is that how this fund decision can be reduced, and in terms of building capacity of existing and new mandate board member, what would be the starting point? This question, I think, as you're moving to the presentation, some answer will come
I
up.
think we'll cover that.
Over.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank
perhaps
you.
if we wait and then we'll see whether there's more that will come from that. Thank you. So, what is the board leadership about? It's very much a governing board functions best when it very much focuses on higher level issues, keeps a keen eye on future-oriented matters of strategy and policy. You know, the goals, the mission, the key performance indicators, and are we, you know, is that happening? But also policies, those board governance policies that talks to number 3 bullet, that they perform its oversight responsibilities in a rigorous but highly efficient manner. Very much about those key areas. And of course, in ASAP 2, we recognize that a highly effective board is one of the fundamental drivers of local partner performance, particularly in times of change, because it's almost like, I always like to think of it as supporting, coaching, mentoring, and what I call hand-holding, you know, in those areas where they may not feel so confident, but you enable them, you empower them. And that's our style pretty much. And I hope some colleagues who are on this platform will also agree with me on that, very much so. And so the role of the board, very much formulating strategy, holding the organization accountable for its progress in achieving its strategic goals. Very much oversight responsibilities. As you can see there, the key question is money being spent well? And as you can see, that's a risk in itself, right? And then, of course, shaping the culture of the organization. Most of our, you know, our local partners, each organization, one of the things for me when I visit and indeed start to engage, whether it be one-on-one or online, is to also understand where they're at. And within that, as a good strategic, you know, person, you would be able to start to pick up on that culture of the organization, be it could be, you know, toxic culture and or otherwise, and then supporting them through what are those causes that makes this culture as it is, but also looking to help them improve to a much more positive. And sure enough, it's all about really the coaching and what we give them within that. So this section very much in the manual starts with an exercise option. So for instance, with the part 1, the exercise number 1 would be what is good governance. And it's just, you know, getting the teams, people to work in groups, allowing them to share what their thoughts are, because it allows you to cover the principles of governance. And then maybe, you know, another exercise, what challenges are faced by the board of directors? How have you overcome any challenges? And this one is always interesting because, you know, most of the people we come across, I think they some challenges, or they think they are, but it brings in dialogue again. It allows you to engage the participants and allows them to share their stories. And I think, like I was alluding to in the previous slide about culture, when they share their stories, you really start to get an insight as someone who's there to assist them with capacity strengthening and exchange of ideas, solutions with others. Pretty key, you know, during that exercise, and then you start to pick up and continue to train. So the facilitator summarizes the key challenges and solutions, for example, and then continue to move on to the next slide. So it's actually, I think it's 70 odd page training manual. So there are a lot of examples within this tool. I definitely go very much in depth as well about describing, outlining what governance, the definition of governance is. And this is always one of the key starting points. And by the way, as I mentioned, there's some references from some of these tools. The leadership involved in decision-making, culture, controls, and accountability, as we said, so that, governance is really about capable people delivering great outcomes in making the world a better place. I always like the soft skills, 2 bullet points. It's very much starting to engage in that training to get people to relax. And while we move on to that. So the module 1, very much about the board governance, roles and responsibilities. The sections are understanding board governance, the role of governance and leadership, principles of governance, and then looking at critical board activities, policies, and procedures that the board in their role should undertake. Very much, and I often, when I get, when we get feedback, evaluation, people really, this is when I find most of our local partner participants having what we call the aha moment, because suddenly they're really starting to understand where the board comes in and where executive leadership comes in. And then later on in the training, we also talk about how you align those two. So roles and responsibilities pretty key. And also looking at module 2, very much about, that, setup of the board. The sections are very much about the components of a balanced board. What I mean by this is a balanced board shouldn't just have all people from finance, but having a mix, someone with compliance, and especially with our local partners, I'm sure most of us on this platform would agree, most of your local partners are dealing with programs. What better thing to do is to target, an individual with those skills and would be able to contribute to the board, ensuring maybe regulation, compliance, a diverse board with someone who would be able to advise the board, the others on the law, regulations, and indeed when, if there are any key challenges that come up. So that is very important components of a balanced board. And you will find in the manual, we have board skills matrix. There are examples of some of the tools you can use, including on that board skills matrix is the knowledge that the board members you're looking for, would have. But also at the bottom, we talk about very much the capabilities, soft skills that you're looking for from those individuals as well, which is the characteristics of the board. And of course, relationship between the board chair and executive director. Key question in this section is, when does the board get involved with management? So I always think it's a really exciting session to start people starting to brainstorm about what that actually means. Who is, what is, when is it that the board should get involved? And that's when then we move to the next stage as well, explaining. So the chair runs the board. The chief executive officer or executive director runs the organization. The chair and CEO have mutual respect for each other. A key point that I like to really emphasize. But this executive should have a voice. I always say a voice in choosing board members, and I often get challenged on this one, but it doesn't mean that, they are having the final say, but, supporting the process, but it is the board that ultimately will look at the skills, competencies, and some of those soft skills, emotional intelligence questions that will give them that overview of what sort of member we would be looking at. And then, of course, the CEO and chair should have clarity of roles. And sure enough, in the organizations where that is clear, things tick away very nicely. And then, of course, I've been talking a lot about the oversight role of the board. This is the section where risk management comes in, and it's pretty key. It's part of the role and responsibility of the board. As I said earlier, it's about a key question, which is my favorite. Does the board have enough visibility in the organization to satisfy themselves that everything is as it should? So in this section, that you cover a lot about the overview of the risks. What type of risks are there? There are those force majeure risks that some of us who living in various countries, experience. Of course, you've got to identify those. Then there are also the staff risks. There are all sorts of other risks. Pretty key for you to be on top of those. And definition of what risk is, the type of risks, the distinction between risk oversight and risk management. And we will, in the manual, we will talk about what we would expect, to be in the risk management plan, which I'm hoping most organizations have, but also the risk oversight role of the board, very distinct. But also covering on how to identify the process of identifying those risks and, getting the teams to working together to identify some of the potential risks, you facilitating to see, and indeed sharing some that, they may forget. But roles and responsibilities in risk is pretty key, and steps to manage risks. The roles and responsibility in particular, I will talk about, assigning key people to those risks when we come to the next stage, but one about that. So the tools to share with participants for each section, they will be highlighted in there. As I said, there's, for instance, with the risk, it's about the process itself, how you analyze, identifying the risks, analyzing the risk, which is the assessment, and looking at estimates in terms of what's the likelihood of this risk impacting of us as our organization, and the impact that would do. So some quantitative, but very much qualitative of that. And when you are identifying the risks, of course, you mustn't forget, about their causes as well. And then risk treatment. What are the actions and mechanisms to minimize risks? And what is acceptable about each risk? And of course, looking at monitoring and, reviewing of risks, continuous monitoring of risk and actions to control them. Very much, as you can see there, example of risk structure, risk identification, risk escalation, the organization being very clear which are the risks we expect to be reported upwards to the ED, but more importantly, also to the board. This is then when you end up with a risk map for your organization, the more important risks, we should be coming up here on this heat map, which we would expect each organization to have. And of course, as you can see, talks about the risk impacts on value, assurance of preparedness, and looking at enhancing risk mitigation. So you can see it's almost like a traffic light system here, the risk heat map. And of course, I always say in the training, it's about the ones in red that you need to be very much high level, and ensuring that someone is assigned, and that this is another board reserved matter on the agenda for the board meetings. That's just in a nutshell there. So it's very much important about risk there. And then also, one other area in terms of performance, examples of resources and tools that we cover as well. I mentioned the principles of good governance, but also just outlining, especially the training manual is such that you can do a shortened version of board governance and executive leadership training, but very much also a 2-day session where you really get in depth, and in particular for all those local partners who are still, beginning in these areas. So it's very much about the capacity advisors and some of the teams that we work with to identify that. I say that because, of course, each organization with a board should have a board code of conduct. That's, that's one area that comes up in our assessments. So we would be, tweaking your training to ensure that you identify those. And certainly, I always advocate that each trainer look at what the assessments identified, look at some of the key documents, board delegation of authority, which is the policy that should be in place. How effective is that? Board evaluation tools. This is what we expect at least once a year, the board to conduct a self-evaluation. And with that tool, which is quite big, but gets the board to assess its own function, and then also assesses the roles and how effective the roles and responsibilities of the board are, and then starts to assess the board chair, the executive director, and then board members also assess each other. That is also part of that growth and ensuring effectiveness in the organization. And with performance management, this comes from the governance performance management matrix that I've used a lot, and I'm sure there are others out there, but very key in our training manual is looking holistically at the organization when it comes to performance management. And this is talking to the board, but also executive leadership. And I think sometimes you find that maybe the board has been trained, but actually the executive director, maybe through HR, do we have a good performance management system in place to monitor performance of each of those key people in the organization, and also linking it very much in terms of performance with the board performance as well. And this tool, I would be, you will find a lot of these examples where it says use the group exercise, where you look at the board governance matrix, very much high level focus areas of governance, performance, strategy, the integrity, softness of those skills, and the people. And asking yourself important issues to consider. How can we improve? Does everything look as it should when you look at performance? Who is responsible for strategy? And you'll be surprised, sometimes people are looking at each other because there's no clarity there. But also looking at some of the softer issues, integrity, who needs to be involved in some of this? And that talks also to the people in the organization. As I mentioned earlier, and Jim Collins talks a lot about are the right people on the bus and removing the wrong people, but ensuring that those right people are in the seats. So do we have the right people with the right skills to deliver? Who needs to act on it? Using key people who can deliver on that. But also the board monitoring of executive management operations. This is now where the ED comes in. Planning, operations, reporting, culture, and risk. And with culture, I can't emphasize enough culture in the organization, but culture of the board as well. So here the board should regularly check with the executive director when it comes to planning and they're presenting to the board. There should always be that all-important question, why are we doing this? So that the board, satisfies itself that things are going as they should. And then, of course, operations. The board does not interfere with operations, but the board should at least understand the operations. Will this help to ensure that every tactic leads to improvement, improved performance, the reporting, What sort of information does the board want? And is the executive leadership giving it information? How else would you check that you're getting the right level of information? And that's pretty key in this training. So you really get them to understand, identify where they're at the moment, but also utilizing some of the other issues that come in on this next section. So the tool, which I was just talking to, and I'll continue to talk to, is the framework. As you can see on this diagram, I like to have diagrams because I always think it's much more, explains things much more. There's the board governance, and the green, very much performance, strategy, governance, talent, integrity, part of the board's role. And as I've just mentioned, planning, operations, reporting, and compliance is to do with the executive director. But then, as you can see, culture and risk talks to both sides. Because, for instance, if the organization, we've got someone with a responsibility for compliance and they are not doing their job, how does that get reported? How will the board know and satisfy themselves? So those key questions are very important. So it's a tool that provides your board with a focus and enables setting up and training people on these key skills, but also looking in there in some of these sections, they'll be looking at the structure that has the potential to enhance the board to exercise its proper oversight and management's ability to implement governance. So it's very much, this is what whenever I'm referring to alignment, I think this tool talks to that pretty much. And I'll be taking questions in a moment. But before we do, those questions were there again, referring to this tool. So I will not repeat it, but you very much start from the top, asking those questions. Is this okay? Whose call is this? Who do we need to tell about performance, strategy, governance, and all that? And then when you look at the operation, the executive director and the senior management team and the organization, including programs, starting at the bottom, working your way up at each step, asking them to ask themselves, why are we doing this? This will help ensure, like I said, every tactic leads to improved performance, but more importantly, they will start to list the key priority improvement areas and any other areas. So in the training manual towards the training, and it's very much about giving them that confidence. I like to think, and I hope in a minute when we discuss, with confidence to actually know how to take a deep dive in each of their areas to satisfy both the operations as well as the board governance, that everything is as it should be. And of course, that also talks very much about the role of the board again. And let me just, sorry, excuse me, there's an interfering there. Looking at strategy environment, existence of a strategy, clear vision, mission, goals, and strategic action. Communication of the strategy to staff and stakeholders. And in the training, you're going to in the manual, you'll find stakeholders mentioned a lot. And I did mention at the beginning, and I'll re-emphasize, stakeholder management is important. And therefore, within this board governance manual, it's very much ensuring we train our local partners, we train those key, executive director and senior management to be aware of the importance of stakeholder management. So stakeholders, communication, you don't wait until things are going wrong to inform your stakeholder. Having that relationship where we're talking about the strategy, where they can come in and look at what you're doing, you're delivering, but also engaging them. And then looking at leadership and decision-making, evidence of mentoring and nurturing by the leadership. The clear decision-making structures, that's your committees I was talking about, with the right terms of references, style of decision-making, and communication of decisions. Those that are higher level decisions are not made in the committees, but that goes to the board, and then the board, they present, and then the board decides. The legal setup of governance, presence of a functional governing body, and compliance with the governance structures. And then, of course, the structures, pretty key. So in the training, very much about my favorite word, alignment of structure to strategy. And I always, those I'm training, it's always about how aligned are you? And I always like to leave, I've just come from an overseas trip, leaving those teams really understanding what alignment means. Adequacy of the structure to fulfill the organizational needs, clarity of roles and responsibilities. Particularly, remember I mentioned the founder and some of those nuances that may come into impact. The effective chain of command, that organogram being very clear to include the board, executive leadership, who reports to what. Clarity is very important. And of course, the all-important interdepartmental relationships. It's training really those EDs about really having that joint up thinking with their teams, but with the board. And of course, I've been talking a lot about culture. These areas to cover a lot around dominant characteristics, values, and behaviors that hold the organization together. Impact of current culture on performance and sustainability of optimum performance by each of the local partners. Pretty key. Just going to move to the next. So overall, as the way I think I will probably be stopping any minute now, it's really about also in this manual, questions that the board and advisors should consider. What areas should we be spending time on? How do we align the board and management on priorities? And your training really should leave those participants very much starting to engage. Or maybe we were doing it like this, but maybe that aha moment, we should be focusing on ABC. How do we make decisions? Are we making the right decisions, and who is making those decisions? How do we communicate those decisions? And that all-important escalation of issues that should go to the board. So how do we ensure that decisions are followed up or escalated to the board? And in that training session, very much leaving them in a certain, terms that they understand that. And also, as I talked about the risk heat map, how do we mitigate risk in everything that happens in the organization? Who is responsible, and who do they report these to? Obviously, those that are sort of small ones that are to do with operations, the executive director would be in charge of that. But it's when now you've got to work and combine with the board. What are the strategic ones that you need to take? So how do we position the board as a strategic partner with management? And I think in the training, you will find some good tools that will really outline that. But it's very important that that strategic partnership is there. And in organizations that we've been training, it's very much key. What should we specifically do in the critical areas of oversight? It comes back again, folks, but it's very important, such as strategy and risk. And of course, how does the work of the board committees relate to and differ from the work of the full board? Like I said, very key. Those board committees do not make the final decisions. They present to the board, and then the board deliberates, and then they decide. So I'm just going to perhaps stop there and see if there are any other questions, observations.
Yeah, thank you, Petronella. Really, really informative and interesting. Participants are appreciating and
Oh, thank
a
you.
couple of questions for you. One is related Some are related on membership. I will pose there. First is that what's the best practice that you can share with participants and the best approach to recruit board members in your experience? And secondly, they were thinking that maybe do we have any guidelines on how to select a board member? And another participant asked a question about can a board member be an employee? The other question was
Sorry, can the board member
be an employee
What
in
does
the
that mean?
organization. Yeah.
And
And the other question is that what would be your advice? How can we regulate the activity of the board so that they don't give more I mean, they don't really work towards the scope of work of the executive management. This is regulated, the board activity is regulated. Is it advisable to have a board member who is not part of the organization, and how this works? And another question was related to the fact that do we have any difference between governor, board of director, or board of trustees? I'll pause here and have an additional question coming in. Over to you.
okay, thanks very much. I think the first question was best approach to recruit board members. Board, in your organization, there should be a board member job description, and including a board chair job description. That's one of the tools, certainly, us in ASAP, we share that. And within that job description, there should be a person specification if you were going to advertise. So you need to develop, what sort of person do we want? And that talks to that tool I talked about earlier, much earlier in the beginning, at the roles and responsibilities section of the training manual. That is the board skills matrix. Very simple one-page document that is in 3 parts, but very much starts with, you would have, board member A, B, C, D, and highlighting who you have at the moment, finance, compliance, and looking at where you're lacking, where's the gaps in that board, and then setting out obviously the competencies they would, type of person they would want to they would want to recruit, but also then looking at those tools, the job descriptions that would really talk to that. And that would be very much the responsibility of the board chair, because the board chair oversees the performance of the board members as well. So, one-on-ones as well as a group, so that they are working to their board constitution, which I think there was a question about that later on. So I hope that's clear. And the other question, I think they were talking, they went on to ask about the guidelines. As I said, it's a job description, the skills matrix for me, and the person specification is pretty key. And I think the other question is, how do you then recruit those board members? I think, and during the training and in the manual, there will be somewhere where it talks about networking. And that's one thing I'm really keen about our local partners teams understanding how to, like I said, stakeholder management, but also networking, using the right networks to get the right level board members, and not just selecting one person, but casting the net wider. So asking from colleagues, maybe other contacts, depending on the stakeholders that you're working with, and those board members also pretty key to assist you to try and get the right level people who will be committed, who will attend those meetings. It's no point appointing someone who's going to be busy and not spend time to support you. So I think that is really important. How can we regulate activities of the board? There are some documents. So each time once a NUPAS assessment has happened and we find some of the capacity gaps, and one of the key areas certainly in governance and executive leadership, we often suggest looking at the board charter constitution, the board terms of reference, very key in that, we often, assist them to update on those, because I've come across board terms of references where they might be actually, misconstruing their role, and they're starting to delve into the running of the organization. So it's looking at those key documents. Board charter, we've got examples of those we can share. We tend to share, and those terms of references, so that in the job description, so each board member is clear about what their roles and what is expected of them. And that board self-evaluation happens. Like I said, it's very key, because then you don't then keep members who are not very active in the organization. That would be, a problem, really. I don't know, Mesme, there was the next one, board not part, board governance. Oh,
So,
the board governance and trustees. I think it's interchangeable, isn't it, Mesme? Some places they start by saying,
mhm,
we often say board directors. Some people say board members or, interchangeably. But it's
yeah.
that body that comes in above the organization, and that governs. So if we focus on that word governing as opposed to running the organization, then I think we probably won't get it wrong. What do you think, Miss Me, as well? You can help me out there.
Yeah, I think that's very it's very on the organization specificity, as well as the composition of the board, and as well as the statute, because sometimes, based on the objective, you see different category of board. You have sometimes you have board of director, board of manager. So sometimes it's a little bit confusing, but the fact is that we need to be very specific, have the board who oversee, they manage the executive team. This is really key. The manager seems to be one side and the board in the other side, regardless whatever the title we put in, but we just need to make sure that role and responsibility are well segregated. Over.
Yes. And also being aware, because there are some very strong executive leaders who still may think that they are in charge, the board reports to them. So very important to have that clarity in the job description. Hence, those separate meetings of the board, very key to just really align themselves. Work well, support, be advisory, be cheering the executive director, but also making sure that they're doing their part in terms of running the organization. So that's pretty key. So
Yeah.
just moving on, we're nearly finishing now. Again, I think I already read these questions. And I often find I like, in training towards the end, it's always great to reiterate, because, I watch the board chair and everybody during training, you see the key areas that they start jotting down. That's when they are having that aha moment. But it's about really questions around where that you should spend time, alignment. I don't apologize for repeating it several times, because it is key. Alignment between the board and management. And for those top-notch organizations that they've got it right, and their stakeholders are wowed and they're, wanting to support them, usually that alignment is important, because they are satisfied that there's an oversight. There's someone overseeing the organization, which is doing brilliant work out there in the communities. How you make decisions, communicating, escalating. So really emphasizing training on all those key areas, including, of course, the board committees is pretty key. And also then looking at those next steps, recommendation that it would be in most of the training manual, very much decide what the board should look like, leaves those participants really starting to think about the capabilities needed on their board. This is not just about having a prominent person from the community, but members with specific professional skills, as I've talked to. Considering having the board represent the social and cultural diversity of the organization itself, literally looking like the organization and the people it serves. So very key. Determining how well the board currently measures up. So always checking performance, but having open, honest, and ongoing discussions, encouraging that in the training, looking at that makeup of the board again, and the extent to which it meets the organization's defined needs. So you are tailoring it to each organization. You've done your homework, and therefore in the training, the trainer is really embracing all that. Have a board, like I say, by law, charter, very important, that states also how long each board member should serve. Pretty key, because you'll be surprised sometimes some people don't have board tenures in place. They don't sign that all-important paperwork. And of course, evaluating each year the performance of everybody. And then, of course, consideration against some other board key areas, oversight, skills, we've talked, engagement, engaging management in providing the information the board requires. This is a pain point, this one. We want it such that that information will allow the board to exercise governance. So it's a good area to facilitate, get them to understand, and giving examples of that. That will be in the manual. But also advising management on policies, which policies are relevant, and have they been refreshed recently, or they're just in a in a folder somewhere. So it's really important about how governance is conducted. They're actually every now and then checking on the guiding documents that they've set themselves, to monitor their performance. And of course, understanding governance activities that occur at various levels within the organization. And I always like to support management in its efforts to enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of programs there. So I'm hoping that this is just a refresher really, but that the training manual will contribute for that the trainer skills. And I talked a lot about culture. As I'm going to finish, I always repeat again, but also sections and training in the manual around the science of a possible problem with the organizational culture is a must in training. There is the silo thinking. They're only looking at one thing. Dominant executive I've talked about. Arrogant leadership, interesting one, but sometimes if you're facilitating, you pick up the nuances from just the team. So how they are reacting to some of the bullet points, and of course, enhancing the training around that. I love that because you can start to read on, where some of the culture is in the organization. Pressure to meet the numbers or over ambitious targets, which might be a risk in itself. Very key. Lack of information, looking at what information else they need, culture, how can we facilitate them around a good culture vis-a-vis a toxic one. That could be very controlling. Toxicity and control is very key. Low levels of meaningful engagement between leadership and staff. We talked about that, but also a lack of openness to challenge. So in your training, there will be issues around this and trying to get that out, but also training them around how to address some of these. Tolerance of breaches of regulations and code of ethics, pretty key. We should really have a zero tolerance. We should really get the organization meeting its codes. But also you come across short-term focusedness, and of course, people with just misaligned incentives. So looking at culture is pretty key. And I think it's an important part of this training that you will find the tool much more helpful in allowing you to develop. And of course, within there, I definitely included a section about, where would you get sources of, if things are not really as they should be in the organization, and training them on that. And of course, the all important, how many people are coming in, and absenteeism rates. And I certainly, when I working with some of the local partners, it's very key to ask each time, you note that they are bringing in new people, and you start to ask yourself what's going on here. Using the training data, of course, recruitment, reward, and promotion decisions in the organization, use of non-disclosure agreements, whistleblowing, grievance, and speak up data. How is that managed? Is this clear? Employee surveys, just checking in with them. Board interaction with senior management and workforce. That's another area as well, that a source of how things are in the organization. And promptness of payments to suppliers, issues to do with finance, pretty key, but also attitudes towards regulators, internal audits, and employees. I like to think as one area that we've been very good with ASAP in working with, and identifying SP key advisors going out in the organization. Those, signs that tell us maybe things are not as they should, but also mentoring, coaching, important. And of course, exit interviews are pretty key, because that also tells you why are people leaving, and it also homes in on some of the fundamental key areas of that. And then I think as I finish, one of the, and I talked about several tools that we have, we've got so many. It's also, tools around each organization understanding where are they in terms of risk. So risks, maturity model tool is really important. And these you'll find examples in the manual as well, where if they're just starting, they're still at number one, they assess, there are many sections to this tool. But what we're hoping is that number 5, risk intelligent. I find when I work with executive directors and share some of that, and with the board, it's a really important tool for them then to use that on those board reserved matters to report to at their meetings, just to make sure that they are managing those risks. And then also some other tools. This is about what sort of leadership pipeline, have they got in the organization with the right skills to do the right job at the right time. And this tool, I certainly used it when I worked elsewhere, where and there are certain versions of pipeline, leadership pipeline tools. And in this, it's where they're talking about strategic stars, people who are standing, clearest example of superior performance and potential. And as you can see, adaptable, high pro, consistently produces. This would be your staff in the organization. And what you would be doing is plotting to see what total people are we looking at. And as you go higher, they're the highly effective ones, as you can see. And the strategic few, the strategic star, are those people who are very much about, have got superior performance potential, ability to take on major stretch roles. And what this is saying, and I usually use it much more so that the people can identify with it, is very much knowing who your people are, how capable are they, and ensuring they are trained to deliver on their potential. And this also talks to that. So you give them critical jobs, you reinforce, you are just working with each individual as a leader to get the best out of them. And that's what this talks to as well. And then, of course, another example of a tool is where I often ask, I did this last week, ask each of the board, what sort of personalities have you got in the board? Which one are you? Are you a personality board, people board, performance board, policy board? You will find this in the training manual, but it just brings laughter and discussion, but actually it's talking to what are we like? Are we a power sharing board, are we expecting division? Are we taking a risk board or changing the system? So these tools would be in there to use as they go on. And of course, why this training, manual coaching is really key. So it's about accountability. Great board members hold themselves and the organization accountable for advancing the mission. Passion for the mission. Their passion is sincere and contagious, helping to promote others' enthusiasm for the mission. Donor access. Great board members demonstrate a financial commitment to the organization and provide access to others. Big picture view. They very much they view the mission through a strategic, not operational lens, and of course, an inquisitive nature. Great board members are not afraid to ask hard questions in striving for their progress. I already talked, oh, sorry, on the wrong way there. So very much that, I think this is it in a nutshell. And this has been, a combination of a combined years of experience in guiding coaching. And I hope the manual will be very useful to everybody. So I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Petronella. There are a couple of questions some colleagues also asked. I'm happy that for some of you, do not hesitate to ask more questions on the Q&A, and even the chat. I will be willing to share with Petronella. But there's one burning question that came in that I'm not sure. Someone asked whether the manual addressed the issue of board member incentive. I think that is yes, one, and whether there's a lot of question that came already that you was clarified during your presentation, basically on the difference between how to assess the performance of board member. I think all of those things have been addressed. So
yeah,
I think that I'm still having this question related to board member incentive. I know that in many organizations, there are some concern about the level of effort that the board member are providing to the organization. And sometimes within the statute and internal regulation, they themselves have stated that it's a voluntary participation. So it looks a little bit strange that when the work becomes a little bit highly demanding, the board members sometimes look less committed because they see there's a lot of things that is actually expected from them. So I wanted to just also share this important question about the board membership as well as its board member incentive. I know there's something that need to be discussed, but it's all about also the organization internal policy, internal regulation. How do you appoint your board members? What is the board membership overall policy that you put in place? It's time sometimes for organization to revisit this internal policy, how to engage the board member. If this is well documented and well known and based on the practice, given the fact that board members they do contribute a lot based on all what we learned today. And I think as Petronella rightly said, you rightly said that it's also a lot of flexibility. People should take ownership of this manual and then see how they could revisit their own internal document and see how this can be addressed. So I'll pass over to you and see. It was the burning question that I have, but I still have some question that comes also. Do you keep? The board? There's a question about Yeah, I mean, the question already about part two, that you want
Mhm.
to know exactly when they will happen, and then they were willing to, a lot of question was around the supporting document after this training, so that they be able to have access to that resource
Yeah,
as well as the
yeah.
recording. Please, over to you.
Yes, I think I will obviously talk to Catherine, our program director, and indeed, I would like to say yes, we will share some of these tools, and then we will perhaps communicate with you all to say where you can access most of these tools. Because the whole idea is about sharing those so that we really work on this governance. So the answer is yes, and we will communicate with you the platform as well. Usually, so I think some of our local partners have got access to these, so we will be doing that, sharing the tools. Were you asking a question about absenteeism, Mesme, of a
No, I
board
was
member?
thinking about the incentive, board member
Yeah.
incentive, but it included. Is there anything that was added in the manual?
There is the absenteeism talks to the, remember that role of the board chair, also performance managing the board members and checking in. And I often find, and I'm sure you do, when we go around and we're training some of the colleagues, you hear people start saying, but they're always busy. The board members are busy. Because if they are busy and they're not committed to supporting you, then I like to think that's already a sign that you're not going to get much contribution, and therefore it's for the board to really revisit the effectiveness of their work, and evaluation is pretty key. That would then give that individual, the board chair, to talk to the individual, and sometimes they can happily part. Yeah.
Somebody said, I mean, ASAP website will be available, so people have access to that. Well, I'm seeing here in the chat, but most of the participants are really thanking the chat. There's no more question. Thanking you for this wonderful presentation. I'm joining hand to them. It was quite interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, folks. I hope we keep in touch again. It's an exciting area that Mesme and I in. So if we can support and enhance, and I think most of our local partners, I'm sure, like I say, it's an aha moment. So that training is very much about that. Oh, thank you for the love and kisses, and I love it. Thank you, and all the best. And no doubt, we do run a leadership community of practice. Do join us, because we're starting to really delve into looking at more best practices as well. So we'll be sharing those links. So thank you all very much. I think this
Thank
is it,
you.
Mesme, isn't it?
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Okay, thank you.
everybody. Let me jump in and thank you,
Oh, thank
Petronella
you.
and
Oh,
Mesme, for facilitating a wonderful and rich webinar. And we hope we see everybody in the part 2. Thank you very much. Have a
Thank
pleasant
you.
day, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.
bye-bye.
Are you there, Mesme? Oh, Jeffrey's gone. Oh, Jeffrey, thank you so much, Jeffrey. I didn't say thank you.
No problem. You guys have a great day.
Okay, and you. Bye bye.